morning sun shines on the gleaming hide of a muscular ranch horse. The aroma of bacon and coffee drifts from the wood cook stove at a cow camp. Silver spurs jingle as the men and women of the West get set for another day in the saddle. From the heart of Canada's finest ranching country, this is the Spirit of the West with rancher and horse trainer Hugh McLennan and his collection of music, poetry, and conversations with the folks who live and work with horses and cattle in the Spirit of the West.
The art of handling cattle from the back of a good ranch horse is something that I've always had a deep love for and a lifelong fascination with the behavior of horses and cattle. And a few years ago, a lot of lights went on for me when I met Dr. Temple Grandin for the first time. Today, she's professor of animal science at Colorado State University. She's had a successful career consulting on both livestock handling equipment, design, and animal welfare. And she's been featured on National Public Radio in the U.S. and on a BBC special, The Woman Who Thinks Like a Cow. She's also appeared on national TV shows like Larry King Live, 2020, 60 Minutes, Fox and Friends, and she had a 2010 TED Talk. Articles about Dr. Grandin have appeared in Time Magazine, New York Times, Discover Magazine, Forbes, and USA Today. And HBO made an Emmy Award-winning movie about her life, and she was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2016. And today, half the cattle in the U.S. are handled in facilities that she has designed, and this week, you'll hear some of the things she talked about in that first get-together with the Spirit of the West.
I know that seems rather counterintuitive, but just try that sometime just when you're working cattle up to the squeeze chute. And it even works out in the pasture, too.
If you're in the cattle business long enough, sooner or later, you'll probably have to deal with a cow or a heifer having a uterine prolapse. And old Baxter Black has dealt with many of them during his career as a large animal vet. And today, he shares one that he'll never forget.
But alas, with one huge effort, she expelled me from her grip. I shot out like a cannon, rolled and did a double flip, but I grabbed her tail in passing.
As usual, lots of valuable information on the Rangeland News.
For steers, it's strong demand at the packer level that we've observing. That's boosting prices.
In Texas, she's known as the singing cowgirl, and she's a great singer, but this week, she recites poetry in our Cowboy Poetry Spotlight.
I can be on the trail anytime I want. I just close my eyes, and I'm there. With my horse so solid between my knees and the feel of the wind in my hair.
On the Irvin Saddles and Western Wear Horse Training File, there's an interesting discussion going on about whether horses can read the expressions on the faces of people. And that's where I'll put in my 2 bits worth. Another fine old classic song of the West and the story behind the song, and then the livestock handling savvy of Dr. Temple Grandin after we head out the gate with a song that Baxter Black and Jack Hanna collaborated on from the Sons of the San Joaquin.
Cowboys all of springtime, on this we do agree. Grass and trees, the birds and bees play their symphony. My spirit sings, my horse has wings, because I'm gonna be riding for the roundup in the springtime. Yippee-yay, riding hell-bent for leather. Hear the hoofbeats pounding and my old rider sing. Yippee-yo, 'cause there just ain't nothing better than riding for the roundup in the springtime. You can hear those cowboys rousting from their bunks at early dawn. They've checked their gear and rigging as they cinch their saddles on. They've had their beans and bacon 'cause the day is hard and long. Riding for the roundup in the springtime. Yippee-yay, yippee-yay, riding hell-bent for leather. Hear the hoofbeats pounding and my old rider sing. Yippee-yo, yippee-yo, 'cause there just ain't nothing better than riding for the roundup in the springtime.
It's out and riding circle across a rough and rugged land, astride an eager pony sitting tall and looking grand. Hazing to the gather, my old pony's a dipping sand, riding for the roundup in the springtime.
Yippee-yay, yippee-yay, riding hell-bent for leather. Hear the hoofbeats pounding and my old rider sing. just ain't nothing better than riding for the roundup in the springtime. You can smell the hair a-burning and the calves are all frustrated. They're mighty scared and lonely from their mother separated. They feel the loop that drags them to the branding iron that's weighted to mark 'em for the roundup in the spring. When the dogies all are branded and we've turned the critters out, we're a-heading for the tavern, every cowboy knows the route. As we're a-rolling back the carpet, all the cowboys give a shout. We'll be a-riding for the roundup come next springtime. Yippee-yay, riding hell-bent for leather. Hear the hoofbeats pounding and my old rider sing. Yippee-oh, 'cause there just ain't nothing better than riding for the roundup in the springtime. Riding for the roundup in the springtime.
Well, we've seen this more than once. The first time you take a bunch of cows or yearlings towards a set of corrals, and with a little time, the leaders find the gate and they file right in. A few months later, you try to do this again with the same bunch of cattle, and they really don't want to go in. And that's one of the things I discussed with Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, that's a really important thing to think about, because the scientific research on fear has shown that if an animal's first experience with something new is bad, it never forgets that. For example, if first time you bring the cattle into the brand new squeeze chute or brand new corrals, you do something really painful to them, they'll be scared of those corrals forever. It's a good idea to get cattle accustomed to the new corrals, having them walk through it so they don't have a bad first experience. Then if you have to do something painful, maybe on the third or fourth visit to the corrals, the animals will associate that with something else, like maybe extra vehicles, rather than associating it with the corrals or with the squeeze chute.
And that fear memory then is always there, even if the animal might become conditioned to mask that fear response. It's still there and can be triggered at any time, you're saying?
Well, the research has shown that fear memories cannot be erased. They can only be suppressed. And the more high-strung and nervous an animal's genetics is, the more likely you are to have problems with fear memories. And again, we've got to make sure that the first experience is good. If a horse's first experience in a trailer is flipping over backwards in it, you may have problems with the trailer fears for the rest of its life.
Right. Interesting what can sometimes trigger these responses too. You're saying that they don't necessarily recognize a person's facial features, but they will recognize what kind of hat a person is wearing or a ponytail or something like that, both horses and cattle.
Yeah, both horses and cattle will pick up on, major characteristics, long hair versus short hair, big hats, beards, glasses. Animals are very sensitive to tone of voice. They can learn their familiar master's tone of voice. You can sometimes have problems with flighty, high-strung cattle that may be tame and easy to handle back at the home ranch, but when you bring them into the sale barn, where it's a totally novel, new experience, they panic and get scared. But if their familiar rancher is there talking to them, he can talk them through it. But if the familiar rancher is not there, then these cattle just go berserk, and it's especially a problem with high-strung animals.
Well, this will get even more interesting as we go along, and the next thing we'll look at is how you can identify some body characteristics in cattle and horses that'll give you some clues as to how they'll handle stress. And there's a song from the fine Western vocalist Joyce Woodson, When the Spirit of the West, continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. It was a fascinating conversation. I was lucky enough to visit with the world-renowned livestock behaviorist and award-winning author and consultant Temple Grandin a while back, and it was a wonderful opportunity to discuss the science of handling cattle and horses.
I've noticed, too, and something you mentioned kind of confirms that the finer-boned animals tend to, like you said, the ones that look a little bit like deer tend to act a little bit like deer. I've kind of noticed that. We've had some exotic cross cows, fine-boned, and if we've had to doctor them on the open range or whatever, my gosh, it's been kind of like doctoring a deer. And the more placid temperament seems to be what you find in the bigger, heavier boned cattle.
Well, that seems to be true for a lot of different kinds of animals. We just got finished working on a book on genetic effects on domestic animal behavior put out by Academic Press, and reviewed a lot of literature and found that the animals with the fine bones, the long, lean, lanky bodies tend to be more nervous and excitable than the more heavy-boned, muscular animals. I mean, in horses, for example, it's the fine-boned, lean animal like the Arab, for example, is more high-strung than a draft horse is. And the same thing's true in cattle. And the thing about a high-strung animal is high-strung animals do not react well if you force them to do something. You may take a heavy-boned, calm animal and force it to do something, and if it doesn't hurt it, it will habituate. But the fine-boned, lean, excitable animal may just get increasingly more and more and more scared if you force it to do things.
Right. And the principle of pressure and applying pressure and then removing pressure, if you're manipulating animals in a corral situation or even out in the open range, I found over and over again that it's so important to recognize the size of the flight zone, and when the animal does what you're asking them to do, then you back the pressure off and move back. And boy, sometimes it's hard to get some of the fellows I work with to realize that and recognize that.
Well, this is a very important principle in animal handling. When an animal does something that you want it to do, like maybe move forward in the squeeze chute and you're cranking its tail, the minute it moves forward, you need to let up on the tail. If you're working out in the pasture and you're working the edge of the animal's flight zone, when the animal moves, reward it by backing off a little bit. Then when it slows down, go back into the flight zone again. The principle is you put pressure on and you take pressure off. If you're teaching a steer how to lead, don't just keep pulling on it. When the steer takes a step forward, let up on the lead rope. Reward the steer by relieving the pressure. The principle is the minute the animal does a little bit of what you want, give relief by relieving the pressure. And this is true for both pressure on the flight zone and for things like teaching the horse to stop. When the horse stops, let up on the bridle.
And next we'll discuss a technique that most full-time working cowboys have learned that really helps with having cattle go where you want them to. Right now, award-winning Western singer Joyce Woodson.
What do you see from your saddle when you go riding on the trail? Is it the distant blue horizon that calls you back to tell its tale? Is it that view of snow-capped mountains or a peaceful valley so green? Do you come back again to find you become a silhouette in a western dream? No matter where in the west you travel, across deserts, plains, or a mountain stream, when you love the view from your saddle, that's when you know you're living the western dream. When the smell of sage follows a rainstorm and you breathe it in, are you washed clean? When you hear the wind sing, see them tumbling down, that's when you know you're living the western dream. No matter where must you travel? Cross deserts, plains, or mountain stream. When you love the view from your saddle, that's when you know you're living the Western dream. That's when you know you're living the Western dream.
I've always loved her voice, Joyce Woodson, from her latest album, Livin' the Western Dream. And now, back to that conversation with Temple Grandin.
Another term that you used that really hit home was counterintuitive. And I guess we're sort of predatory creatures ourselves, and we're dealing with animals that are prey animals, with horses and cattle. And the intuitive thing for us to do is to pursue cattle from behind, to get them to move up a chute or whatever. But as you demonstrated, going in the opposite direction, walking past their shoulder, opposite to the direction you want them to go, is what really works. But boy, I find as people, we kind of have to struggle with our instincts to do it the other way.
Well, we've got to get away from just pushing from behind, from behind. As you walk back past the animals in the opposite direction of desired movement, they'll often go forward. Why don't you try this sometime just in your own chute at home? You want to get the animals into the squeeze chute. Just walk back along the chute towards the crowd pen. As you pass the shoulder of each animal, it will go forward. Now, why do they do this? This is a predator avoidance behavior. If you watch the nature shows and you watch a lion chasing the antelope, when the lion passes the shoulder, the antelope goes back the other way.
That's the point that pivots, that turns them around.
That's right. The shoulder is the point of balance. If you want to make an animal go forward, you've got to be behind the shoulder. You want to make it go backward, you've got to be in front of the shoulder. And it works best if you walk past the animal in the direction opposite of the desired movement. And I know that seems rather counterintuitive, but just try that sometime just when you're working cattle up to the squeeze chute. And it even works out in the pasture too. You walk in the opposite direction, it moves them away faster in the opposite direction from the direction that you're walking.
I've noticed over the years, even sorting on horseback in corrals and pens, the same thing seems to work. If you just control your horse in the same way you'd control as you walk, you go past that balance point of the shoulder, and the animal moves in the direction you want, like that.
That's right. And then another thing we've got to be careful of is not to overcrowd the flight zone. Because if you overcrowd the flight zone, you're going to make the animals either run away or make the animals turn back on you. And when you're working the edge of that flight zone, the principle is you put pressure on and you take pressure off. You alternate pressure. And this is a very universal principle. Whether you're teaching the steer to lead or you're working the flight zone of a bunch of cattle on pasture. The minute the animal does what you want it to do, back off, give relief. And then when they slow down, you put a little pressure back on again. It's also important when you're working the cattle is do everything at a slow walk, where you've got to get rid of all the noise and the yelling and screaming. The yelling and screaming hurts their ears. We've got to calm the cattle handling down. Do it at a walk without a whole lot of noise.
We can get them stirred up in about 5 minutes or less with a lot of chousing. How long does it take for them to calm back down?
Well, some research done with a heart monitor showed that it took 20 to 30 minutes for the cattle's heart rate to return to normal after they were gotten all excited. So the take-home message of that is we've got to prevent them from getting all excited.
Right.
More about the science of handling livestock from Temple Grandin in a little while. Next, it's Baxter Black and the Prolapse from the Black Lagoon. A song from the fast-rising Western music star Matt Robertson, and then the Rangeland News, when the Spirit of the West continues right after this.
Howdy, friends. This is Baxter Black on Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan with a little peek at the prolapse from the Black Lagoon. What holds the loaded 30,000-pound trailer to the heavy-duty truck? What holds the 38-foot RV trailer to the dually? What holds the 2-horse trailer with your daughter's favorite pony to the half-ton pickup? Well, the odds are it's a B&W trailer hitch, probably a turnover bowl, American-made, employee-owned, customer-tuned, and proud of their part in America's greatness. B&W, holding things together down the road. When something goes wrong with a cow, the biggest problem is usually not solving it, it's diagnosing the problem. Once you know what to treat, the solution is simple. One exception is the uterine prolapse. I can guarantee you the treatment is never simple. Some have compared it to stuffing a smoked ham down a sink drain, or trying to turn an octopus inside out. Well, I don't know about that, but Here's my story. It came from out of nowhere, like a prolapse in the night, which in fact is what it was, my friends. The cow vet's scourge and plight, that pudgy pink projectile from those monster movie scenes, like some whopping giant burrito filled with attitude and beans. I was soon laid down behind it on a hillside in the muck, while the cowboy shined his high beams from his perch there in the truck, his rope stretched from the bumper to her front legs tied in haste as I wallowed in the darkness like a sow stripped to the waist. It was bigger than a tree trunk. It was slick as old chow mein. It was heavy as a carpet someone left out in the rain. I tried to gain some purchase as I pressed my fist in tight. It was thrashing like a porpoise and was putting up a fight. I got it in a hammer lock. It was like a rabid dog. I wrapped my legs around it like a monkey on a log. I pushed until my shoulder disappeared inside the mass as I scrabbled for a foothold in the mud and frozen grass. But alas, with one huge effort, she expelled me from her grip. I shot out like a cannon, rolled and did a double flip, but I grabbed her tail in passing, and with strength born out of war, I dove at the appendage like some punch-drunk matador. I lifted her hind quarters, I swung her side to side, then like smart men do, I used my head to push it back inside. It was dark there for a second, hard to catch my breath, but there she lay, my patient I had saved from certain death. The cowboy rolled his window down and said, "Doc, are you all right?" He gunned the engine several times. The headlights got real bright. "I've seen a prolapse done before, but never quite like that." Oh, they taught us that in vet school. But I think it ate my hat.
This is Baxter Black
On Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan.
brought to you by B&W Turnover Bowl.
He's a lifelong working cowboy, a fine horseman, and he wins darn near every ranch rodeo bronc riding event he enters. And boy, does he write good songs. Now a fast-rising star in the Western music world, Matt Robertson.
Timing was off the day he was born, 100 years too late. Wanting to be a wild outlaw or a cowboy like Will James. But he'd never see the buffalo roam or the battles on the plains. And they all say we're a dying breed, but I'll keep supporting the name. Those days might be gone, but they'll never be forgotten, like the sweet burning smell of nylon on cotton, where the chutes are made of wood and cowboys are made of steel. We'll travel down roads that never end and carve our initials in the places we've been in. Always live our cowboy dreams, making history, making history. Bad winters leave us chilled and cold. We're still punching cows in 4 feet of snow. The cold back ponies that we ride guide us when we're lost in the middle of the night. I won't give up, it's the way I was raised. Learned it from my folks, the only way to keep on striving for success is how my heroes became the best. Those days might be gone, but they'll never be forgotten, like the sweet burning smell of nylon on cotton, where the chutes are made of wood and cowboys are made of steel. We'll travel down roads that never end and carve our initials in the places we've been, and always live our cowboy dreams, making history, making history. Time is up, just play this song, turn my ashes loose in the wind. I'll be floating in the air at the end of my dream, just watching another's begin. My days might be gone, but they'll never be forgotten, and I'll still be roping cattle with nylon on cotton, and I'll be riding broncs and chutes that are made of wood. Now I'll be traveling down the road with my cowboy friends, and how we got here we must have reached the end, and there'll be more people chasing their dreams, making history, making history. Making history. Making history.
Now the news of the rangeland, a roundup of news and coming events from around the West. We'll tell you what's new under the western sky right after this word from the cattlemen of Western Canada.
Beef cattle ranching is an important part of British Columbia's economy. Most ranches are family-owned, operated by second or third-generation ranchers. Together, they employ over 4,000 people, supporting communities and local businesses such as veterinarians, mechanics, truckers, and more. Beef cattle ranching truly provides economic stability to many BC communities.
Now, the Rangeland News, top of page 1. New projections are in for beef demand and how they might relate to steer prices looking down the road. With more, here's Rod Bain.
The latest total meat production forecast shows small changes month over month.
Beef up, the rest of them down, but they're small changes. For beef, we made an upward adjustment from what we observed from the cattle on feed report, offsetting with a little bit lighter weights as well from what we're observing on cattle feed. So a little higher placements offset with a little bit lower weights.
World Agricultural Outlook Board Chair Seth Meyer says still, production forecasts for all meat categories remain up year over year. As far as the price perspective from the previous month,
we increased prices of both steers and hogs. So steers up $2.75 and hogs up $4.25. For steers, it's strong demand at the packer level that we've observing. That's boosting prices. For the hogs, it's all the way through the supply chain.
Although 2017 price forecasts for steers and hogs are lower than the prior year. Broiler prices were increased 2 cents a pound from January and are slightly up price-wise from 2016. As for meat trade, the only adjustment was in beef exports month over month due to strong Asian demand. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The Canadian company Maple Leaf Foods is buying a U.S.-based manufacturer of plant-based protein foods for about $140 million U.S. Maple Leaf's buying Light Life Foods, makes 30 innovative products, including plant-based hot dogs, breakfast foods, and burgers. And the deal is financed from cash on hand, expected to close very quickly, subject to U.S. regulatory review. Maple Leaf said in a release that plant-based protein foods category is growing faster than the overall packaged food sector. Well, when it comes to beef, certain traits like tenderness are easier to quantify than others. Beef flavor is very complex. It's not one attribute but many flavor notes, says Bridget Wasser, the executive director of meat science for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And she told the convention that the beef community has made marked improvements in tenderness over the last few decades. So the good news is it allows us to focus on some of the other eating attributes. Lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins that make up beef have the greatest influence on flavor. And lipids or fats are species-specific, differing in both the amount and fatty acid composition, and that, she says, is why beef doesn't taste like pork or chicken. I think that's a good thing. Shipments of slaughter-ready cattle to the U.S. market from Canada during the first 5 weeks of this year were 23,915 head. That's 26% lower than the same period a year ago. Fed cattle slaughter in the U.S. at this time of year is running at around 90,000 head per day. So overall imports of cattle from Canada in the first part of the year represents about 1% of the total U.S. figure. And it's likely that Canadian cattle on feed numbers, the experts tell us, will be somewhat limited in the near term. According to Canadian placement data for that period, placements declined an average of 20%. But similar to U.S., placements rebounded in November and December, up 19% and 6% respectively. And the smaller on-feed inventories and the decline in placements may also reflect the decision by Western feedlots to wind down operations. Well, the spring machinery auctions are a great social event, and that's where we get to visit with friends and neighbors who we probably haven't seen all winter. At the BC Livestock Co-op yards in Williams Lake on May the 6th and in Kamloops on May the 13th. And at that Kamloops sale, you'll get a chance to bid on that gorgeous 1973 Massey Ferguson 125, completely restored from the ground up by Mark McMillan. Engine completely rebuilt, running gear, hydraulics, transmission, steering gear, and a beautiful new paint job and new instruments and seat and decals. It is a thing of beauty. And you can find out more about what's coming up at future sales at bclivestock.bc.ca. And across the mountains, some special bull sales coming up at the Innisfail Auction Market in the coming weeks, and you can get all the details at InnisfailAuctionMarket.com. And of course, regular cattle sales every Wednesday and 2 horse sales a month at the Innisfail Auction Market. They're great folks to deal with. And we're down to the final item, and this week's final item comes from the local hero, former bull rider who now does motivational speaking across the country and works so hard for brain injury research, Curtis Anderson.
Hello, Billy and you. This is Curtis Anderson. I don't have a poem, but I have a joke for you. A man was walking down the beach. Sees a bottle, so he picks it up. A genie pops out and says, "You have 3 wishes. First wish, I like a sound mind." So he gets that. Second wish, I like a bridge from Vancouver to Victoria. I can't do that, it's all water. What's your third wish? I'd like to understand women. Did you want that bridge 2 lanes or 4 lanes? Thank you, bye.
Well, thank you, Curtis. And remember, this year's Courage Canada Trail Ride for Brain Injury Awareness is May the 27th. For more information, you can call 780-581-4802. Coming up on the Irvin Saddles and Western Wear Horse Training File, can horses read and interpret the expressions on our faces? That's coming up, and more from Temple Grandin when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West, just ahead of the Irvin Saddles and Western Wear Horse Training File. You know, the trail that we ride on, we meet folks along the way, and some of them leave a lasting impression. Curly Musgrave was one of those folks, and I was lucky enough to share some stage time with him in a lot of places like Branson, Missouri, Tucson, Arizona, Calgary, Kamloops, and many others. And over the years, we've had some wonderful, meaningful conversations. Curly loved the cowboy way of life. He had a wonderful gift for songwriting, and he was raised in Alberta's cattle country and emigrated to California at a pretty early age. And we lost him way too soon to a malignant brain tumor. He was a dear friend to so many of us, and another good friend of Curly's and mine, Butch Falk, did a wonderful recording of Curly's song, One Last Trail.
These old cowboy bones are weary from years of hanging on to ornery cayuses and memories long gone. I can barely hit the saddle when the morning cold prevails, and I've left the better parts of me on the many drives and trails. My thumbs are thrashed and throbbing, and my knees have long been gone, crushed twixt fence and bucking colts when the breaking needed done. But it's not that I'm complaining, Lord, or wanting to turn tail, but I hear you calling for me, and I'd like one last trail. Lord, give me one last trail. Lord, give me one last ride before I hang my spurs and saddle and cross that last divide. Let me see one more sunrise, hear one more coyote's wail, praying one last sundown, riding one last trail. I've been blessed, Lord, like few others who would love the life I choose, that spend their life in high-rise walls on crowded avenues. But I just don't want to hang 'em up, though my body's getting frail, and I figure I've got wind enough to ride one last trail. Lord, give me one last trail. grant me one last ride, for I hang my spurs and saddle and cross that last divide. Let me see one more sunrise, hear one more coyote's wail, praying one last sundown, riding one last trail. I can't count the days I've tasted, near forgot when I was born. Names of ponies that I've mounted, except this road I'm riding on. Partners' names will oft escape me, and my memories fade and fail. But I remember I'm a cowboy, so give me one last trail. Lord, give me one last trail. Grant me one last ride, for I hang my spurs and saddle and cross that last divide. Let me see one more sunrise, hear one more coyote's wail, praying one last sundown, riding one last trail. Praying one last sundown, riding one last trail.
Now it's time for the Horse Training File, brought to you by Irvine Tack and Western Wear, Canada's largest Western store.
The subject this week, can horses actually read and interpret the expressions on our faces? And that's coming right up. At Irvine Tack and Western Wear, you won't find this.
Hey, yo!
But you will find this.
Welcome to Irvin's. How can I help you?
You won't find this.
What size boots you wear there, boy? You got tiny feet.
But you will find this.
Absolutely, we have your size. In fact, I've got the perfect pair for you right here.
The one and only Irvine Tack and Western Wear, something for everyone. Cowboys and cowgirls to city folks too. It's Western Wear with a welcome twist. Off exit 305 on Highway 2 by Crossfield. Open 7 days a week.
Canada's largest Western store.
There's an interesting discussion going on among the observers of horse behavior, and the question is, can horses read human facial expressions? I was never totally convinced, but I know for a fact that a horse very accurately reads human body language, and that's a very effective way of communicating with them and eventually developing it into liberty work. And I'm also convinced that they are very aware of eye contact. And for that reason, and some of my cowboy friends laugh at this, but I will not wear sunglasses when I work with horses. And how about this? A new study shows that horses tended to look at the angry faces of people out of their left eye, a response well documented in horses and dogs, indicating that an animal engaging in the right hemisphere of its brain where novel and fear-provoking stimuli are processed. The horse's heart rates also rose more quickly when they were presented with the angry face. Being able to tell a smiling handler from an angry one is a useful skill for a domestic horse, and being approached by a frown rarely results in happy consequences. Now, the authors of this survey speculated that horses may simply have been on applying an ancestral ability to read the facial expressions of their own species into a morphologically different species. Now, in this case, humans. And the same University of Sussex scientists found last year that horses have 17 distinctive facial expressions, more than dogs that have 16, or chimpanzees with 14. And many of which are similar to humans' 27 facial movements like creased brows or eyes widened in fear. However, since the horses tested in this particular study came from riding schools where they interact with humans all day, every day, their face reading ability may have been learned in their lifetime. And that's the Irvine Saddles and Western Wear Horse Training File. Our horses really enjoy that daily feeding of Hoffman's Horse Ration, and you can find out more at hoffmanshorseration.com. Come and see the largest selection of well-broke horses in Western Canada at the 4th Annual Top Gun Horse Sale. April 15th, high noon at the Kelnash Event Center, Ponoka, Alberta. You can preview the horses Friday, April 14th at 4 p.m., and they start coming through the ring Saturday, April 15th at high noon. Horses for ranch work, team penning, rope and trail riding, barrels, mounted shooting, and kids' horses, every type of horse you might be looking for. Every horse will be ridden, driven, or led into the ring. Rain or shine, everything is inside. For information and to look at the horses, see TopGunHorseSales.com or call Jordan 403-783-0246. And Billy keeps reminding me that I got to patch the holes in the studio ceiling after I made the sound effects for that one. Bullet holes, all right. I watched a slideshow a while ago that Temple Grandin showed us, illustrating a horse in a stall, and the stall was slowly filled with wheat until it surrounded the horse, and it seemed to have a calming effect on that horse. And I asked,
does it really work?
Yeah, I watched it demonstrated one time in Arizona, and it was the most amazing thing. It just caused the horse to relax. Now, the wheat isn't just dumped on the horse. He's in a stall. It's very similar to a horse trailer stall. And the wheat slowly goes down the sides of the stall, and his head is outside of it. His head is never put in this. And it makes even pressure all over his body. And it calms the horse down. And when you bring the horse out of this 20 minutes later, you have about 30 minutes where you can touch him all over and show him that you're not going to hurt him. It's very important that this be done gently. There's way too much abusive, rough stuff done with horses, and the high-strung animals are the ones that do not respond well to rough treatment. They simply don't habituate to things that are done roughly.
You drew some interesting comparisons to how that pressure all over the horse's body has a similarity to people with autism, which I believe you're very familiar with.
Well, yes, because when I was a little kid, I had autism, and one of the problems in autism is supersensitive senses, supersensitive touch, supersensitive hearing. And a lot of little autistic kids will do things like get under sofa cushions or under mattresses because that calms down the nervous system. In fact, this is used in therapy with autistic children. And I think this wheat pressure box uses the same principle because it seems to have its maximum effect in about 20 minutes. And it also seems to work best on the kids that have a real high autonomic nervous system arousal, which means the nervous system is ready to fight a lion off even though there is no lion around.
And you said that it doesn't work as well on kind of a docile old horse who's been around people and may have developed some bad habits and just takes advantage of people. That type of horse doesn't benefit from that as much.
No, it doesn't seem to work on that type of horse where it's just sort of a willful disobedience. It seems to work the best on bad behavior that's fear-based. See, in working with either horses or cattle, you've got to figure out, is their bad behavior fear-based or is it aggression-based? Now, if the bull goes after you, that's aggression. But when you're handling the animal in the squeeze chute and he's going berserk in the squeeze chute, that's fear-based behavior. And a lot of problems with horses in training is fear-based behavior. And if you punish fear-based behavior, it just makes it worse. Now, if you have some pushy old plug that's so tame he's just pushing on you, you know, sometimes an animal like that needs a little rap on the nose because that's not fear-based behavior. That's just disobedience. But you've got to figure out the difference because if you punish fear-based behavior, you're going to just end up wrecking the horse. And, you know, look at his skeleton. If he's fine-boned and he's got a hair whorl that's way up above his eyes, he's more likely to have fear-based behavior than some big old heavy-boned plug that's just walking all over you.
That's fascinating, and we hope to bring you more from that conversation in the coming weeks. Coming up is our classic Song of the West from a legend of Canadian radio and early television, and then the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. Time for another classic Song of the West, and this one is from a guy who was really a superstar in the early days of Canadian television and before that in radio. Back in 1948, he was known as GWG's Singin' Cowboy. GWG, the Great Western Garment Company. And in 1948, I started wearing GWG blue jeans because of him. He joined forces with well-known rancher, oil executive, and cutting horse breeder Cliff Ross to initiate the Calgary Stampede street entertainment. And Wilf Carter heard his regional radio show. I think it was on CFCN in Calgary about that time. And Wilf was instrumental in arranging this guy's first contract in New York. And that's when he wrote his famous theme song, Saddle Your Worries to a Cowboy Song and Yodel Your Troubles Away. Of course, I'm talking about the one and only Stu Davis. And his shows like Rope Around the Sun and Red River Jamboree drew huge television audiences. And he starred in the first network TV show to be produced at the new CBC Broadcast Center in Edmonton when it opened in 1961. His many business interests included real estate and an Alberta cattle ranch, and a lot of us can still close our eyes and remember when we were kids hearing his famous sign-off, "May all the trails you travel lead to happiness." And in 1968, CBC viewers learned all about the prairies with the help of a program called Trail Riding Troubadour. And that 13-part series had Stu Davis and his son Dwayne riding and singing their way through Western Canada. And at the time the show aired, CBC had only been broadcasting in color for 2 years. And as we sat down to watch, here's what we heard.
From the Red River Valley to the Rocky Mountains, from Hudson Bay to the Sweetgrass Hills, come travel along the highway of the past with the Trail Riding Troubadour.
Turn back, history's colored wagons roll. It's the call of the West.
Now, this song was recorded before the days of television back in October of 1946, and I can't find out who wrote it. But the steel guitar player here was Vaughn Horton, who wrote another classic Western song that became a huge hit for Rex Allen Jr., Teardrops in My Heart. And this is Stu Davis with Land of Sky and Water.
You may like your buildings tall, I like where there's none at all. Just give me land, sky, and water. You may like those crowded places, I like where there's open spaces. Just give me land, sky, and water. Let me hear the billows roar and lonely seagulls cry. Let me go back home once more to live until I die. And when I'm gone, just bury me where the winds blow wild and free, out where there's land, sky, and water. Your building's tall, I like where there's none at all. Just give me land, sky, and water. You may like those crowded places, I like where there's open spaces. Just give me land, sky, and water. Let me hear the billows roar and lonely seagulls cry. Let me go back home once more to live until I die. And when I'm gone, just bury me where the winds blow wild and free, out where there's land, sky, and water.
Stu Davis. Well, Miss Letty is a wonderful Western singer. She's really popular in Texas where she lives, but we have her in the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight this week, and it's called I'm a Cowhand in My Heart.
Why does it so affect my heart, these old trail songs of long ago? I wasn't even alive back then, and I am a woman, you know. So I wouldn't have been a-riding with them old cowboys on a trail. But if you could read my mind, oh, the stories my imagination could tell. I'd tell of a warm, glowing campfire at night, with my partners close at hand, as I'd sup on coffee, beans, and jerky, and I'd gaze out over the land in wonder of what tomorrow could bring, a stampede, or a river, or just an easy time. And as the boys play cards on a worn saddle blanket, I just might pull out my last dime to wager on what they're betting on, or should I save it for some rock candy? When next I'm in a town, I'll most likely pay for a bath, and boy, won't that feel dandy. 'Cause I'm so dirty, and I'm so tired, and I'm sure plumb wore out. But there never is a moment that could ever make me doubt why my head's on this saddle and my blanket's on the ground, and I'm about to fall into a deep, restful sleep as I listen to the sound of the wind whistling on the prairie, and I can hear a pretty night bird sing. I'll be thanking my Father in heaven not to change a doggone thing. Yes, I can be on the trail any time I want. I just close my eyes and I'm there, with my horse so solid between my knees and the feel of the wind in my hair. As I listen to a sagebrush symphony behind a coyote's wailin', I pull out my old guitar and send a sweet melody a-sailin'. Cross the flat plains up the walls of a mesa. Yes, it echoes oh so sweet. As I sing these cowhand songs of ore, to my heart it sure is a treat. So when you watch me singin', and my eyes are closed shut tight, know that I'm a cowhand on the trail, on a prairie, somewhere in my heart tonight.
Well, thank you so much for making the ride this week. Sure hope you can saddle up and ride along right here next week at the same time. And be sure to pick up the latest issue of Canadian Cowboy Country Magazine at your newsstand. There's great reading, and you can subscribe online at cowboycountrymagazine.com or by calling 1-800-943-7336. And for our U.S. listeners, as you may know by now, Cowboy Country Television is available on RFD TV. Till next week, I'm Hugh McLennan. Hope to see you down the trail somewhere real soon.